The hum of the galactic station was an ever-present soundtrack as the bustling crew worked through their tasks. But in one remote section of the sprawling compound, an unusual event was unfolding. The station's elite security personnel had received a stark warning: apex predator detected. The alert had triggered a flurry of activity as guards and sentries scrambled to intercept any potential threat to the station's security. But as the alert spread through the system, there was confusion. The predator, the system's sensors insisted, was on the loose, moving between the engineering decks and the outer observation ring. Elizabeth, a seasoned human diplomat who had spent the better part of a year aboard this galactic hub, was unaware of the panic unfolding around her. She had always been curious about the station's inhabitants, especially the native species who considered themselves to be far superior to humans. But Elizabeth knew better than to let arrogance dictate her approach. She had always been observant, respectful, and understanding of the foreign cultures she encountered. That, however, did not mean she was immune to the station's occasional misunderstandings. Her companion, Evan, had an entirely different perspective. As a human with a deep love for interspecies exploration, Evan was intrigued by the station's ecosystem and its strange wildlife. It was his insatiable curiosity that led to the discovery of something no one would have expected: cubs. Not just any cubs, but alien creatures that looked like they belonged to a vicious apex predator species, known for their territorial behavior and savage nature. The cubs had appeared on the station under mysterious circumstances, and the security systems had failed to account for their presence. This was something the authorities were not prepared for. But what the guards didn't know, what no one had expected, was that the cubs were far less dangerous than their species' reputation suggested. Security officer Zorith had spent countless hours monitoring the feeds, always on the lookout for potential threats to the station. The apex predator detected alert had his blood running cold. He had been trained to respond swiftly to such dangers. His squad was already mobilizing. Yet, something didn't sit right about this particular alert. The predator wasn't just prowling. It seemed domestic. He checked the internal systems and narrowed the location down to a specific quadrant. There, in the quiet recesses of a maintenance bay, a strange scene was unfolding, something that no amount of military training had ever prepared him for. The security footage revealed a small group of cubs, alien creatures with sleek fur, retractable claws, and razor-sharp teeth gathered around a female figure, Elizabeth, the same diplomat who had always seemed unthreatening, now surrounded by what should have been her natural enemies. But instead of danger, there was an odd sense of peace. The cubs were washing their fur with Elizabeth's shampoo. Zorith rubbed his mandibles in confusion. It was an absurd scene. The cubs, despite their fearsome genetics, were behaving like any other young creature, playful, curious, and evidently fond of the human woman. Elizabeth was seated cross-legged on the floor, her hair tied back in a practical bun. She had always been warm and kind-hearted, but to see her with these creatures who had once been enemies of her people, was an unsettling sight to any observer. Evan was nearby, perched on a workbench and watching the scene unfold with his characteristic grin. He was less surprised than Zorith might have hoped. Evan had grown rather fond of the cubs, often finding himself indulging their antics. Zorith took a breath and activated his comm link. "Team, stand down," he said, his voice a low growl. "There is no threat. It's just cubs." The confusion in his voice was palpable, even over the comms. Elizabeth glanced up from the cubs, sensing the approaching security team. They hadn't exactly been subtle in their entrance. She smiled warmly, standing up to greet them as if this was a perfectly normal situation. "I promise, they're harmless," she said, her voice light and full of reassurance. Zorith and his team stood frozen, eyes darting between the cubs and Elizabeth, who was casually petting one of the creatures. The delicate scent of shampoo still lingering in the air, they seemed quite comfortable. Zorith finally said, a hint of awe creeping into his tone. "Comfortable? They've been like this for hours," Evan replied, his voice full of amusement. "They've always been curious about her. I'm just glad she wasn't freaked out when they decided to help her clean up." Elizabeth gave Evan a playful glare, but there was no real malice in it. She was unbothered, enjoying the company of the cubs. They were in a rather rough spot before. "You know," Elizabeth said, her expression softening. "They were abandoned and left to fend for themselves in a hostile environment. But they've adjusted. I've done what I could to help them, and in return, they've become attached." Zorith's gaze shifted to the cubs, who were now tumbling over each other, their bellies full from a meal Elizabeth had prepared for them. It was a sight no one had ever expected to witness: an apex predator species, now domesticated, cared for by a human diplomat. "Do you have any idea how dangerous they are?" Zorith asked, his voice cautious. "Oh, I do," Elizabeth answered, her smile never faltering. "But they aren't dangerous to me. They trust me." She knelt down and petted the cub closest to her, who looked up at her with affectionate eyes. "I don't see any reason to be afraid of them. Sometimes the fiercest creatures need a little kindness." Evan stepped forward and gently rubbed the back of one of the cubs, who let out a contented chirp. "It's funny," he said. "Everyone thinks that because they're predators, they're inherently bad. But that's not true for all of them. Some just need the right environment." Zora stood silently, processing what he had just witnessed. It wasn't just the fact that the cubs weren't attacking. It was the fact that Elizabeth had shown them an unspoken kindness, something even the fiercest creatures could respond to. If the Galactic Council knew about this, Zorith muttered, "they'd never believe it." Elizabeth shrugged with a grin. "Maybe, but I think they'd be more inclined to listen if they actually saw it for themselves. These cubs might be apex predators, but they have a different side to them. They're more than just their instincts." As Zorith nodded, a new realization hit him. Perhaps it wasn't just the cubs that had a different side. Humans, too, had the power to surprise. And this human Elizabeth had managed to tame something that no one else could even begin to understand. "Perhaps," Zorith murmured, "humans aren't quite as simple as we thought." And so, while the station's security team stood perplexed at the sight before them, Elizabeth and Evan continued to care for the cubs, their trust growing stronger with every passing moment. It was a story that would echo through the halls of the station for years to come, a reminder that sometimes it was the smallest acts of kindness that could bridge the most dangerous divides. As for the cubs, they found comfort in Elizabeth's gentle touch, and perhaps, just a little, they learned what it meant to be more than just predators.